Before we begin, drop in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. By the end of this, you will understand why that matters. There are events in the historical and scientific record that resist every available category, not because the documentation is poor, not because the witnesses were unreliable, but because what was documented falls outside the boundary of what any existing discipline has produced a language adequate to describe. The recordings made in the Cutter's Fork Hollow of McDowell County, West Virginia, between September 14th and October 2nd of 1973, belong to that category. Dr. Raymond Ashby, a 54-year-old folklore and acoustic anthropology researcher at the University of Virginia, left 6 battery-operated reel-to-reel tape recorders in a hollow that the surrounding community had refused to enter for longer than anyone living could remember. He retrieved 5 of them. What those 5 machines had captured over 18 days has never been formally published, formally explained, or formally acknowledged by the university that employed him. What happened to the 6th recorder and to the man who went back for it alone is a matter of incomplete record. This is what the record contains. McDowell County, West Virginia, in the autumn of 1973, was not the easiest place in America to conduct academic fieldwork. The coal industry, which had defined the economy and geography of the region for 70 years, was contracting sharply. Mines that had employed 3 generations of the same families were closing on schedules that gave those families weeks of notice, sometimes less. The county seat of Welch sat at the bottom of a narrow river valley, hemmed in on every side by ridgelines that blocked the afternoon sun by 3:00 in September and by 2:00 in October. The hollows that branched off the Tug Fork and its tributaries, Cutter's Fork among them, were places that had never been fully absorbed into the administrative geography of the county, even at the height of the coal boom. Roads into those hollows were unpaved, frequently washed out, and were not maintained by any county or state body. Telephone lines did not reach them. The nearest hospital was 40 minutes from Welch on a good road, and there were no good roads leading out of the hollows themselves. Whatever happened in those places happened without the immediate possibility of outside intervention. That had been true in 1900. It was still true in 1973. Raymond Ashby had been studying Appalachian folk acoustic traditions for 19 years by the time he arrived in McDowell County. He was a careful man, methodical in the way that a career spent in archives and field conditions simultaneously produces, a man who had learned to be both precise and patient. His build was slight, the kind of frame that comes from decades of desk work, interrupted by irregular stretches of outdoor field work rather than any consistent physical labor. Shoulders somewhat rounded, hands smooth at the palm but ink-stained at the right forefinger and thumb from a lifelong habit of annotating documents in the field rather than waiting to return to an office. His eyes, as described by his graduate assistant of that period, a woman named Carol Denton, who later published a partial account of the McDowell County expedition in a 1989 folklore journal, were dark brown and very steady, the eyes of a man who had trained himself to observe without reacting. He had a habit, Denton noted, of going absolutely still when he heard something he did not immediately understand. Not frozen, just still. A listening stillness that she described as his most characteristic professional behavior. Ashby had come to McDowell County for a specific and well-defined purpose. He was documenting the acoustic remnants of pre-industrial Appalachian community life, the field hollers, the shape note singing traditions, the call and response patterns used between workers and between households in communities that had communicated across distances using vocal techniques that predated any electronic technology. He had done similar work in Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee. He was not, at the outset, interested in the supernatural. He was interested in the human voice as a pre-technological instrument of community organization. He was a scientist. He made that clear to everyone he spoke with in McDowell County, and the record suggests he meant it entirely. The first indication that Cutter's Fork Hollow might warrant his particular attention came from a retired mining engineer named Olin Blevins, 71 years old, whom Ashby interviewed on September 8, 1973. The interview transcript is preserved in the Raymond Ashby Collection at the University of Virginia's Albert and Shirley Small Special Collections Library, cataloged under the Appalachian Acoustic Archive, Box 14. In that transcript, Blevins, when asked about the acoustic properties of the McDowell County hollows, which Ashby was studying in part because of the way steep, ridgeline topography creates unusual sound reflection and amplification effects, mentioned Cutter's Fork almost in passing. His exact words, as transcribed, "That one you won't want to go into after dark? Sounds come out of that hollow that don't have a source. Been that way as long as anybody can remember. Company men went in there in 1921 to survey for a lateral shaft, and 2 of them quit before the week was out. Said they heard something that wasn't an echo. Ashby's typed transcript includes a handwritten marginal note beside that passage, in his own hand. It reads, "Investigate further. Nobody thought too much of local acoustic folklore when it appeared in the margins of a fieldwork transcript. It happened constantly. Every hollow had its stories." Ashby spent the following 4 days conducting additional interviews. He spoke with 9 residents of the surrounding communities, Bradshaw, Avondale, and the smaller settlements along the Tug Fork Road, and asked each of them, as part of a standardized interview protocol, about any unusual acoustic phenomena they had personally observed or heard reported in the local hollows. 7 of the 9 mentioned Cutter's Fork without prompting. Once Ashby raised the general subject of unusual sounds, their accounts were consistent in specific ways that Ashby recorded in a field journal, a green canvas-covered notebook that Denton later described as his constant companion during the McDowell County work. The sounds reported were not described as animal sounds. They were not described as wind effects, which Ashby knew could produce extraordinary and disorienting results in narrow hollow topography. They were described consistently and with evident discomfort in the telling as voices, not words, voices. The distinction was made explicitly by 4 of the 7 informants. "Not words you could understand," said a 68-year-old woman named Vera Combs, whose family had farmed the ridge above Cutter's Fork for 3 generations. "Just voices, like people talking in a room you can't get into." The transcript of that interview is also in Box 14. The marginal note beside Vera Combs' account is longer than the one beside Blevins. It reads, "Possible infrasound resonance in hollow geometry producing auditory pareidolia or acoustic remnant phenomenon, deploy recorders." The cold had come early that year. By the second week of September, the ridge maples had already begun to turn, and the morning fog that settled into the Cutter's Fork drainage was dense enough that the hollow's entrance, a gap between 2 sandstone outcroppings where a seasonal creek bed ran, was invisible from the road until you were within 20 yards of it. Ashby and Denton entered the hollow on the morning of September 14th. Denton's 1989 account describes the interior as narrower than expected, the ridgelines rising steeply on both sides to create a slot of sky that was even at midday more gray than blue. The creek bed at the hollow's base was dry. The vegetation was dense, laurel and rhododendron so thickly intergrown across the lower slopes that movement off the creek bed was impractical without tools. The hollow extended approximately 3/4 of a mile from its entrance before closing at a sandstone headwall. It was, Denton wrote, extremely quiet, not peaceful quiet, the other kind. They placed the 6 recorders at measured intervals along the hollow's length, following Ashby's standard protocol for acoustic documentation. 3 along the creek bed at 200-foot intervals, 1 at the base of each ridgeline slope at the hollow's midpoint, and 1 positioned against the headwall at the hollow's terminus. Each recorder was loaded with a full reel of tape, calibrated for ambient sensitivity and secured to a fixed surface, a rock face, a root mass, a sandstone ledge, using a mounting bracket. They were set to record continuously. The battery packs Ashby had sourced were rated for 22 hours of continuous operation. He had brought sufficient packs to sustain recording for 18 days, with a planned retrieval on October 2nd. They left the hollow before the afternoon fog came back in. Denton noted that neither of them spoke during the walk back to the road. She did not, in her 1989 account, offer an explanation for that silence. She simply noted it. The fog had settled back into the hollow by 4 in the afternoon. The ridge above it was dark by 5. On October 2nd, 1973, Ashby and Denton returned to Cutter's Fork to retrieve the recorders. The account of what they found in those first 5 machines and what the tapes contained occupies the central and most extensively documented portion of Denton's 1989 journal article, as well as the more detailed record contained in Ashby's own field journals, of which boxes 14 through 17 of the UVA collection are relevant. The retrieval itself was unremarkable. 4 of the 5 successfully retrieved recorders were found exactly as placed, their mounting brackets undisturbed, their tape reels fully advanced, indicating continuous recording throughout the deployment period. The 5th recorder, the one placed at the hollow's midpoint against the eastern ridgeline, had been moved, not knocked over, not displaced by an animal, moved. It had been relocated approximately 6 feet from its original mounting position and set upright on a flat sandstone surface with a deliberateness that, as Ashby wrote in his field journal, implies the action of hands. He noted this. He collected the machine. He did not, at that point, know what was on any of the tapes. Here is what was on the tapes, and here is where the language of academic documentation begins to fail the record it is attempting to contain. The first 3 recorders, those placed along the creek bed, had captured exactly what Ashby's protocol was designed to capture: ambient hollow acoustics, wind effects, animal sounds at the expected registers, The acoustic signature of the sandstone ridgelines in fog conditions, hours of it, unremarkable, scientifically useful. The fourth recorder, the one placed against the western ridgeline, had captured the same for approximately the first 11 days of the 18-day deployment. On the night of September 25th at approximately 2:17 in the morning, the time reconstructible from the tape counter and the battery consumption log, Ashby maintained for each unit, the ambient acoustic signature of that recorder changed, the background fell away, the wind effects stopped, the animal sounds stopped. What replaced them for a period of 43 minutes was a sustained acoustic event that Ashby was unable to classify using any reference in his 19 years of acoustic field documentation. It was not infrasound, it was not wind, it was not any animal call in the documented fauna of the central Appalachian region. It was, in the description Ashby committed to his field journal after his first listening, conducted in his car in the Cutter's Fork Road turnoff with Denton present, vocal in character, multiple sources, rhythmically structured in a pattern that does not correspond to any call and response tradition I have documented or studied, not language, not animal, intermediate. The fifth recorder, the one that had been moved, had captured the same event from a different angle, the same 43 minutes, the same absence of ambient background preceding the event's onset, but from the position it had been moved to, the acoustic separation between what appeared to be individual sources was cleaner. Ashby estimated, based on his initial field analysis, between 7 and 11 distinct vocal sources active simultaneously, producing a layered structure that he described as organized without being harmonic in any Western or documented folk tradition sense. The closest comparison he could locate in his own reference library, he wrote, was to certain overtone singing traditions documented in Central Asia, but the register was wrong, the spacing was wrong, and unlike overtone singing, no single source appeared to be producing multiple tones. Each source was producing one. Together, they produced something that Ashby spent the drive back to Welch trying and failing to name. The sixth recorder was not there, but something was on the tapes. What Ashby did with those tapes in the weeks that followed is documented in the university correspondence files. He submitted a preliminary report to his department chair, Dr. Franklin Oates, on October 19, 1973. That report, which remains in the UVA collection, is 12 pages long. Its conclusion section is 3 sentences. They read in full, "The acoustic event captured on Units 4 and 5 on the night of September 25th does not conform to any known natural, mechanical, or human acoustic phenomenon within the scope of existing documentation. The event appears to be structured. Further investigation is recommended before any publication or public discussion of these findings." Dr. Oates's response, a single-type memo dated October 23, 1973, recommended that Ashby set aside the McDowell County materials pending a more thorough review of the methodology and refocus his attention on the Kentucky Shape Note project that was already partially funded. No further university correspondence on the McDowell County recordings exists in the institutional files. Ashby's personal journals, however, continue. On November 11, 1973, 5 weeks after the retrieval, Raymond Ashby drove back to McDowell County alone. He told Denton he was going to retrieve the sixth recorder. He told her he would be back by evening. He did not tell the university. Denton's 1989 account states that she asked him not to go. She describes his response as quiet and entirely certain. He said he needed to hear what the sixth machine had recorded, she wrote, not to analyze it, just to hear it. He arrived at Cutter's Fork in the late morning of November 11, 1973. He did not come back by evening. He was reported missing on November 13th. A search was conducted by the McDowell County Sheriff's Department over 3 days, covering the Cutter's Fork Hollow and the surrounding ridgeline terrain. The search produced his car, found at the road turnoff, his field journal, left on the front seat, his battery pack case, open and empty, left the hollow entrance, no Raymond Ashby, no sixth recorder, no physical evidence of where he had gone or what had happened when he got there. The McDowell County Sheriff's Report, filed November 17, 1973, lists the case as an open missing person investigation. It has never been closed. His field journal, the one left on the car seat, contained one entry dated November 11th, made apparently before he entered the hollow. It is the last entry in the journal. Denton quotes it in full in her 1989 article. It reads, "If the sixth machine is where I think it was moved there by something that wanted it in a specific position. That means it was recording something specific. That means whatever produced the sounds on the 25th knew the machines were there before the 25th. I need to know what it recorded. I need to know if the sounds were directed at the machines or at something else." He had one more line below that, written and then crossed out. Denton noted the crossing out but stated she could not fully reconstruct the struck-through text. What she could make out of it, she wrote, were the words, "close enough to understand." Today, the Cutter's Fork Hollow in McDowell County is accessible by the same unpaved road that existed. In 1973, the sandstone outcroppings at its entrance are unchanged. The rhododendron on the lower slopes has grown denser in 50 years. There is no marker, no signage, no designation of any kind. The University of Virginia's Albert and Shirley Small Special Collections Library holds the tapes from recorders 1 through 5 in the Raymond Ashby collection, listed as restricted access, available to credentialed researchers by appointment only. The restriction classification was applied in 1989. The same year, Denton published her partial account, and the listed reason for restriction is materials in process of scholarly review. They have been listed under that classification for 36 years. No publication of the tape contents has been issued by the university or by any independent researcher granted access. Raymond Ashby was declared legally dead in 1980, 7 years after his disappearance. His estate was settled through the Charlottesville, Virginia probate court. The green canvas field journal that was found on the front seat of his car was returned as a personal effect to his sister in Roanoke. She donated it to the university in 1983. That is the last entry in the chain of custody for any physical artifact connected to the McDowell County recordings. Here is the question that the record leaves open, and it is not a comfortable one. Ashby's final journal entry assumes, with the clarity of a trained researcher who had spent weeks analyzing the tapes, that what produced those sounds on September 25th was aware of the recording equipment before it chose to produce them, that the 43 minutes were not incidental, that they were in some sense intentional. If that assumption was correct, and Ashby, a man with 19 years of acoustic fieldwork and a demonstrable commitment to empirical caution, clearly believed it was, then what is the framework within which that intention is understood? The scientific one, which has no available category for it, the folkloric one, which has categories that predate science by centuries, and which the 7 informants who described Cutter's Fork to Ashby clearly believed were adequate, or some third framework that neither discipline has yet developed, in the direction of which a careful, methodical man drove alone on a November morning and did not return? The Hollow does not answer. It has not answered in 50 years. It was not answering before Raymond Ashby arrived, and it has not started since. Some places carry a record that no institution has yet built the tools to read. Some questions are answered only by the people who go looking for them in the wrong kind of silence. This is one of the most deeply unsettling cases in the academic documentation of Appalachian phenomena. Not because the evidence is thin, but because the evidence is precise, and because the man who understood it best is the one the record cannot account for. What do you believe was on that 6 tape? An acoustic phenomenon that science hasn't categorized yet, or something that has been in those mountains long enough to understand what a recording device is for? Drop your answer below. If stories like this one, the documented ones, the ones with names and dates and archive call numbers that lead to locked drawers, are the ones you want to keep hearing, subscribe, and ring the bell. We have more. They do not get easier, but they are real. Stay out of the hollow after dark. And if you hear something that isn't an echo, do not go back alone.